The first thing they tell you about the Caliph Empire is that they have been building starships since before humans figured out how to make a wheel round. The second thing they tell you is that you, a human, will never understand their technology well enough to matter. I heard both of those things a lot during my 3 years working salvage contracts out of Ostrom Station. I never argued. I just fixed what I was paid to fix, and let my work talk when my mouth couldn't. My name is Sam Kessler, and I am not a genius. I want to say that clearly before anything else, because what happened on the Empire's flagship, the Veirathi Ascendant, sounds like something out of a story where the humble hero turns out to be secretly brilliant. That is not what this is. I failed math twice in school. I got my mechanic training by taking apart broken tractors on my uncle's farm because we could not afford to buy new parts. That is the whole secret. There is no twist where I reveal a hidden genius. I just know how to fix things that are broken, using whatever is lying around, because that is how I grew up. So when the call came through my station's comm system, asking for the human contractor with reactor experience, I figured it was some minor cooling system on a cargo hauler. I did not expect to be picked up by a military shuttle with an escort of 3 armed guards who looked at me like I might explode. "You are Kessler?" the lead guard asked, staring at my toolbox like it was a suspicious animal. "Last I checked," I said. They did not laugh. Caliph soldiers rarely do. 20 minutes later I was standing on the bridge of the Veirathi Ascendant, the pride of the Imperial fleet, a ship so large it had its own weather system in the lower decks. And it was dying, not exploding, not on fire, nothing dramatic like that. It was simply losing power, section by section, like a body slowly going numb. The reactor core, the heart of the entire ship, was failing, and nobody could figure out why. I was led to the engineering deck by a tall, silver-skinned officer named Instructor Vale Thressa, who had the kind of posture that told you she had never once slouched in her life. She looked at me the way you might look at a stray cat that wandered into a laboratory. "You are the human," she said. It was not a question. "Guilty," I said. "We have exhausted our finest engineering minds on this problem," she said, gesturing to a room full of alien scientists surrounded by holographic screens, each one covered in equations I did not understand, and did not need to. 17 of our top specialists. 4 days. No solution. You have 4 hours before the reactor reaches critical failure, and this ship becomes a very expensive rock. "No pressure," I muttered. She did not find that funny either. The engineering deck was beautiful, honestly. Clean lines, glowing panels, screens showing simulations running 1,000 calculations a second. It looked like something out of a movie about the future, which I suppose it was, just not my future. Every engineer in that room had a doctorate. Every engineer in that room had trained for decades. And every single one of them was standing around a reactor that was dying, arguing about theoretical models, instead of touching the actual machine. That was the first thing I noticed. Nobody had opened a panel. Nobody had put their hands on anything. They were all staring at screens, running simulations, cross-referencing data from the ship's own diagnostic systems. Nobody was actually looking at the reactor itself. "May I take a look?" I asked. Vale sighed, the kind of sigh that said this will not help, but I have no better option. "Do not touch anything without permission." I walked past the screens, past the arguing scientists, and knelt down next to the reactor's main housing. It was a massive cylindrical structure, humming faintly, with pipes and cables running in every direction like veins. I put my hand against the outer casing. It was warmer on one side than the other. That told me something already. "Your diagnostics say the core itself is fine," I said, mostly to myself. One of the engineers, a thin fellow with 4 arms who I later learned was named Dressick, answered anyway. "Correct. The core registers as fully functional. The failure pattern does not match any known malfunction in our database. That's because you're all looking inside the reactor," I said. "I think the problem might be outside it." The room went quiet, not a polite quiet. The kind of quiet where everyone is thinking the same thing at once, and that thing is this human does not know what he is talking about. "The core is the single most sophisticated part of this vessel," Vale said slowly, like she was explaining something to a child. "If the failure is not there, it is nowhere significant." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you built something so sophisticated that everyone forgot to check the boring stuff." I asked for a tool that let me trace the coolant lines, and after a lot of confused looks, and one quiet argument in a language I did not understand. Someone handed me something similar enough to a thermal scanner that I could work with it. I followed the pipes leading away from the reactor, out of the main chamber, down a maintenance corridor that clearly had not been walked through in a long time. Dust on the floor. Actual dust. On a ship that was supposed to be spotless. "Nobody comes down here?" I asked. "That corridor services a secondary coolant relay installed 11 years ago during a refit," Dresick said, checking something on his screen. "It has not required maintenance since installation. 11 years without a single check. The system is self-regulating," he said, sounding a little defensive now. I found the relay at the end of the corridor, a smaller metal box connected to the main coolant system with a series of thick cables. When I ran the scanner over it, I found what I was looking for. A tiny crack, barely visible, running along a weld point where two different types of metal met. It was leaking coolant, slowly, so slowly that the ship's main computer had never flagged it as a problem, because on its own, a slow leak from a secondary relay was nothing to worry about. But it had been leaking for years, slowly, quietly, and the ship's automated systems had been compensating for it the entire time, rerouting extra coolant to make up the difference, hiding the problem so well that nobody ever noticed the growing pressure imbalance building up in the main reactor housing. The computer had done its job too well. It had hidden a small problem so completely that it let a huge one grow underneath it, undetected, for over a decade. "There," I said, pointing at the crack. "That's your monster." Dresick stared at it like I had shown him a ghost. "That is a 2 mm fracture. It could not possibly account for a failure of this magnitude." "On its own, no," I agreed. "But it's been leaking for years, and your computer has been quietly patching around it instead of telling anyone. Now the pressure difference has built up so much that the main core is starting to strain trying to compensate. Your reactor isn't broken, it's exhausted." I could see the disbelief on every face in that room. 17 of the Empire's best engineers, and not one of them wanted to believe that the answer had been a small crack in a forgotten pipe the entire time. It felt too simple, too unglamorous. There was no elegant equation for it, no beautiful theory. Just old metal, worn down by time, doing exactly what old metal does when nobody checks on it. "Even if you are correct," Vale said carefully, "repairing that fracture would require shutting down the secondary relay entirely, which would place the full coolant load back onto the primary system, which is already under strain. The reactor may not survive the transition." "It might not survive not doing it either," I said. "You've got maybe 3 hours before it fails on its own anyway. At least this way we're choosing when it happens instead of waiting for it to choose for us." There was a long argument after that. A long, loud, complicated argument, in a language full of sounds I could not follow, between engineers who had spent their whole careers trained to trust data over instinct, simulations over hands-on judgment. I understood their hesitation. If I were wrong, I would be the human who convinced them to shut down a critical system on the Empire's flagship and killed it faster. But I was not wrong, and some part of me, standing in that room full of dust and old pipes, knew it. "Give me the 4 hours," I said. "If it doesn't work, you can say you told me so." Vale studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, sharply. "You have 90 minutes, not 4 hours. If you fail, I will personally explain to the Fleet Command why we allowed a human to gamble with the flagship." 90 minutes is not a lot of time to fix a decade-old problem, but it turns out you do not need elegance when you need speed. I did not have access to their fancy automated welding tools, the ones that could fuse metal perfectly down to the atom. Those machines needed calibration time we did not have, so I did it the old way. I patched the crack with a sealant compound normally used for hull microfractures, something one of the junior technicians found in a supply closet after I asked if they had anything sticky and strong. It was not designed for this. It was not in any manual, but I had used similar compounds 100 times on old farm equipment, held together by nothing but stubbornness and good sealant. While the patch set, I rerouted a portion of the coolant flow manually, bypassing 2 of the automated regulation systems that I was fairly sure were the reason nobody had caught this problem in the first place. Dresick nearly had a heart attack watching me disconnect a system that had been functioning perfectly for years. "You are removing a safety protocol," he said. "I'm removing a protocol that's been lying to you," I said. It's not the same thing. The patch held. The manual reroute worked, awkward and inelegant as it was, giving the main reactor room to breathe, while the pressure slowly equalized. It was not pretty. There were exposed cables taped in place, a control panel held together with more of that same sealant, and a system running on a temporary fix that I promised, honestly, would need a proper repair within the month. But it worked. 20 minutes before the deadline, the reactor's readings began to stabilize. The dying hum of the ship steadied into something healthier. Lights that had been flickering across the lower decks came back on, full and strong. I watched the numbers on the main screen slowly climb back into the safe range, and for the first time since I had walked onto that ship, I let myself relax. The room was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. 17 of the Empire's finest engineers stood staring at a reactor that should not have been fixable by anyone in 90 minutes, let alone by a human mechanic, with a scanner and a tube of hull sealant. Vale walked up beside me and looked at the readings for a long time before she spoke. "How did you know to look outside the core?" I shrugged. Because the fanciest part of any machine is usually the part everyone trusts too much to check. It's the boring pipes and old wires that get forgotten. I've fixed 100 engines that way. The expensive part is rarely the problem. It's always something small and cheap that nobody bothered to look at. She was quiet for a moment. That is not how we are trained to think. No offense, I said, but maybe that's the problem. She did not answer that. She just looked at the reactor, then back at me, and something in her expression had changed. It was not quite respect yet, not fully, but it was no longer the look she had given me at the start, the one that said stray cat wandered into the wrong room. I stayed on board another 2 days, helping her team properly repair the relay the right way, with the correct tools and the correct materials, teaching a few of the junior engineers how to actually put their hands on a machine instead of only trusting a screen. They were fast learners once they stopped assuming the answer had to be complicated. Word travels fast on a ship that size, and faster still across an empire that loves its gossip as much as any human station does. By the time I left, I had 3 more contract offers waiting for me, all from ships with problems their own engineers could not solve. I do not think it is because humans are smarter. I really do not. I think it is because we grew up fixing things with whatever we had, learning that the best answer is not always the most impressive one. The Caliph Empire has been building ships since before we had proper wheels. But sometimes, all that history teaches you to trust the theory more than your own 2 hands. And sometimes, all it takes to solve an impossible problem is someone willing to get on their knees, look at the boring parts, and ask the simple question nobody else thought to ask.